The studio lights were warm and forgiving, the kind designed to make every guest feel safe, welcomed, and slightly larger than life. Denzel Washington had walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, offering that familiar half-smile, the one that carried both humility and authority. He hugged Jennifer Hudson politely, exchanged a few quiet words off mic, and settled into the chair with the ease of a man who had done this hundreds of times before. From the outside, it looked like another polished daytime television moment. Inside, though, something felt different. Denzel's posture was alert, his hands clasped more tightly than usual, as if he already sensed where the conversation might drift. Jennifer opened with praise, listing his achievements, his discipline, his influence on generations of actors. The audience nodded along, clapping at all the right moments. Denzel thanked her, his voice calm and measured, deflecting attention the way he often did. When the conversation stayed on craft, mentorship, and the joy of storytelling, he relaxed slightly. He spoke about responsibility, about choosing roles that meant something, about the quiet power of consistency. But then the tone subtly shifted. Jennifer framed a question around industry expectations, mentioning how some stars were criticized for staying silent during controversial moments. She didn't name names, but the implication hung in the air. Denzel paused before answering, eyes briefly lifting toward the lights above, as if searching for the right angle. He responded carefully, saying that not every battle needed to be fought in public and that integrity wasn't always loud. His words were thoughtful, almost philosophical, and the audience murmured approval. For a moment, it seemed like the tension had passed. But Jennifer followed up, gently at first, suggesting that silence itself could be interpreted as comfort, even complicity. The word lingered. Complicity. It landed harder than intended. Denzel's expression changed. The smile faded, replaced by something firmer, more guarded. He shifted forward in his chair, elbows resting on his knees, a posture that felt less like a guest and more like a man defending his ground. He explained that his career had never been about playing it safe, that sacrifices were often invisible to those watching from the outside. His voice remained controlled, but there was an edge now, a subtle steel that the audience could feel even if they didn't fully understand it. Jennifer, sensing the emotional charge, tried to soften the exchange, but curiosity pushed her onward. She referenced past interviews, comments taken out of context, critics who argued that Denzel had benefited from a system he once questioned. That was the moment the room truly shifted. The audience went quiet, unsure whether to clap, laugh, or hold their breath. Denzel leaned back slightly, shaking his head, not in anger, but in disbelief. He said he'd spent decades navigating expectations placed on him not just as an actor, but as a symbol, and that those expectations often ignored his humanity. His words grew more personal. He spoke about being boxed into narratives, about how easily a lifetime of work could be reduced to a headline or a talking point. The warmth of the set lights suddenly felt harsh, exposing rather than comforting. Jennifer listened, nodding, but the clock was ticking, producers likely whispering in her earpiece. She attempted to redirect the conversation, but the momentum had already shifted. Denzel wasn't finished, not angry, but resolute, determined to clarify something he felt had been misunderstood for years. The audience sat frozen, aware they were witnessing something unscripted, something raw. This wasn't the rehearsed vulnerability of daytime television, it was a man pushing back against a narrative he hadn't agreed to carry. Denzel's voice lowered, steady and deliberate, as he emphasized that respect mattered, that context mattered, and that he refused to be framed as a convenient example for a broader debate. The atmosphere grew heavier with each sentence, the kind of weight that presses against the chest. By the time Jennifer tried once more to steer the discussion back to safer ground, it was clear that the balance had shifted. Denzel wasn't playing along anymore. He sat there, composed but visibly tense, eyes focused, as if bracing for what might come next. The audience sensed it too, that this conversation had crossed an invisible line, and there was no easy way to step back over it. What happened next unfolded faster than anyone expected. Jennifer took a breath, her professional instincts kicking in as she thanked Denzel for his honesty and attempted to pivot toward his upcoming project. She smiled, nodded, and offered him an opening line meant to cool the temperature. But the moment had already slipped beyond the neat boundaries of daytime television. Denzel didn't interrupt her, but he didn't follow her lead either. Instead, he sat still, listening, his jaw set, his eyes steady in a way that signaled he was weighing a decision rather than a response. When he finally spoke again, his tone was quieter, almost conversational, which somehow made it more intense. He said he respected Jennifer and understood the role she was playing, but he couldn't pretend the question hadn't crossed a line. He explained that coming onto a show under the promise of celebration and reflection, only to be steered into a moral trial, felt dishonest. The words weren't explosive, but they landed with undeniable force. The audience shifted in their seats, some nodding, others glancing nervously toward the stage crew. Jennifer responded carefully, reminding him that difficult conversations were part of growth and that the show aimed to reflect what people were already discussing. Her voice remained warm, but there was strain beneath it now, the strain of balancing empathy with control. Denzel shook his head slowly. He said growth didn't require ambush, and dialogue didn't need to come at the expense of respect. For the first time, a ripple of scattered applause broke out, quickly fading when it became clear this wasn't a moment meant for clapping. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged looks. A stage manager edged closer to the wings. The clock in the control room ticked louder with every second. Jennifer attempted once more to soften the exchange, saying she never intended to make him uncomfortable. Denzel nodded, acknowledging her words, but then added that intention didn't erase impact. The studio felt smaller now, the air thicker. It was the kind of silence that television rarely captures, because it doesn't know what to do with it. Then Denzel did something unexpected. He stood up, not abruptly, not angrily, but with a calm finality that instantly changed the room. Gasps echoed from the audience. Jennifer rose halfway from her chair, instinctively reaching out as if to pause the moment. Denzel thanked her for the invitation, thanked the audience for their time, and said he believed conversations mattered, but only when both sides agreed to the terms. His voice never rose. That was what made it so powerful. Jennifer, clearly caught between compassion and protocol, asked him to stay, reminding him they were live and that she valued his presence. For a split second, it looked like he might sit back down. Instead, he offered a polite nod, a small smile that carried more sadness than anger, and turned toward the side of the stage. Applause broke out again, louder this time, mixed with murmurs of shock. A producer approached, speaking quietly, guiding him toward the exit as cameras scrambled to find something else to focus on. The broadcast cut to a wide shot of the audience, then back to Jennifer, who stood alone under the lights. She took a moment before speaking, her composure impressive but clearly hard-won. She addressed the viewers directly, saying she respected Denzel Washington immensely and regretted that the conversation had ended the way it did. Her words were careful, graceful, but the tension lingered like an echo that refused to fade. Within minutes of the show ending, clips flooded social media. Some praised Denzel for standing his ground, calling the moment a rare display of authenticity in a media landscape obsessed with soundbites. Others criticized him for walking off, arguing that tough questions came with public influence. Jennifer found herself in the center of the storm as well, with supporters applauding her professionalism and detractors accusing the show of pushing too far. By evening, the incident had become more than a viral clip. It sparked debates about celebrity boundaries, interview ethics, and the fine line between meaningful conversation and manufactured conflict. Statements from representatives were vague and diplomatic, offering respect on both sides without adding clarity. But the image that lingered wasn't the headlines or the arguments online, it was that quiet moment when Denzel stood up, thanked the room, and chose to leave. For viewers, it felt like witnessing a crack in the polished surface of television, a reminder that even the most controlled environments can't fully contain human emotion. The show moved on the next day, as shows always do, but the moment stayed with people. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was restrained, unresolved, and unmistakably real.